Well, now that everyone has settled down, let's move on to our next session on leveraging adversity. To moderate this session, I would like to invite on stage Editor Outlook Business, Ms. N. Mahalakshmi. May we please also have on stage Chairman and CEO PepsiCo India, Mr. D. Shivakumar, who runs a massive operation consisting of soft drinks, snacks, breakfast cereals, mineral water, just to name a few. He's had a distinguished innings at Hindustan Lever and Nokia in a career that spreads well over 3 decades. Joining him will be Pidilite Industries Managing Director, Mr. Bharat Puri, the company that owns brands like Fevicol, Fevikwik, and M-Seal. Mr. Puri has had long stints at Asian Paints and Cadbury before his current assignment. He has worked in India and overseas and brings to the table rich experience of diverse markets. And I'd now like to call upon Managing Director and Group CEO JSPL, Mr. Ravi Uppal, a key player in steel, power, mining and infrastructure. He has worked in ABB, Volvo and L&T in a long career spread over 4 decades. He's made a mark in each of these profiles. And I'd now like to invite Nestle India's Chairman and Managing Director, Mr. Suresh Narayanan. His company is easily identifiable with brands like Nescafe, Maggi, Kit Kat and Cerelac. Mr. Narayanan spent several years at Hindustan Unilever and runs Nestle's operations hereafter, having worked in markets in other parts of the world. Over to you.
Thank you, panelists, for joining me today. I couldn't have thought of better names for this discussion, which is leveraging adversity. And the reason is that all the 4 gentlemen out here have been fortunate, quote unquote fortunate, to have faced adversity at some point in time in their career. And this is their own admission, that they have been fortunate to have experienced an adversity in their career. So my first question is, just reflect on your most adverse moment in career and tell me, what did you cope? And specifically, what are the 2 things you did that turned out to be beneficial in future?
Well, I think, there are some people who seem to be quite attractive to crises, and I count myself in one of those, a lot of people who either land into one. So I think my experience and that of my team in the last year and a half on handling the whole the Maggi saga in India was probably the toughest part of my career so far. But I must say that it is not about me, it is about my people. And I think I'm always extremely proud of the fact that they stood and they stood tall. And it is they who have made a difference to this organization. And I'm just a speck, one small person to make that happen. 2 things that I have learned. First is, in adversity, manage yourself. You don't realize how important leadership is when people look at you. So manage yourself. And number 2 is, be faithful to your people and be faithful to your purpose. If you follow these 2 principles, I think the rest follows.
Bharat, tell me more about the lively stories around your crisis. I mean, now that you look back, they sound very lively to hear.
Yeah. See, unlike Suresh, I never thought of myself as somebody who attracts crisis. And the story really is, in life, my mother always says, Dekho, every life it completes. If you do good, something bad is also going to happen. And when you do bad, something good will happen. We were actually in Bangkok, this is 2003, with me and my team. As a lot of you in the multinational world know, that budget meetings are a high point of the year because it's large amounts of negotiation for very small numbers, but still lots of negotiation. And here we were being fated as the unit of the year because it was October and we had already done very well. In fact, we were close to already completing our year's budgets. So we were actually being fated as the unit of the year when I get this call which says, there's been some cases of infestation in Cadbury chocolate and, it's on television. What? It's okay. Most food companies, not most, all good food companies have incident emergency response teams. So I said, listen, is the incident management team in place? Have we done? I mean, it'll surprise a lot of you, but actually infestation is very common in chocolate. If you go to the web and see, it doesn't matter which country, etc. it is because of storage conditions, some insect or the other will go. In fact, I have a response from, forget the name of the company, which said, even if you've ingested it, nothing will happen. So, unfortunately, we couldn't do any of that. By the time we got back 2 days later to Mumbai, it was a full-blown crisis, and you realized it's a crisis because as you came into Cadbury House, there were demonstrators outside Cadbury House. And like Suresh says, I mean, the next three...
Tell them about the black paint.
Yeah. In fact, yes, that came a little later. In fact, I think those 3 months were the most harrowing period of my life. Simply because you suddenly are in the middle of something you're not at all prepared for. And it comes at you from all angles. I mean, across a large part of the media, it became, can you find some defective chocolate? I would get calls from all kinds of places. I've got this bar in front of me. Isme kharabi hai. Do you have anything to comment? My friend, can we see the bar? How can we comment without seeing? No, I'm going straight to the television station. And of course, as these things go on, the local politicians got in. Suddenly, one day we find there are television crews outside Cadbury House. And we asked the television crews, why are you here? And they said, no, the local MLA has told us he's coming for a protest, but he's already prepared us. So the local MLA came and, of course, very theatrically lay down in front of Cadbury House and said, carry me away from here. He came with black paint and said, I have to blacken the face of the MD. So, fortunately, I was actually going to go and talk to him. And when my HR director said, boss, he's not interested in talking to you. He wants the television moment of putting the paint. So, it was an incredible period. You go through massive amounts. And really, if I was to say, what are the two adverse things that you learn out of this? The first in all of this is you have to keep a clear head and you have to set clear direction. Because if you get confused and if you get caught in, and in a lot of multinationals, we mistake discussions for decisions. Finally, it is about daring greatly and acting quickly. And I think the second thing, as he really said very clearly, is you have to keep your team. I mean, in the end, you will win or lose if your team believes that they will win. And I mean, I was really proud of my team. Again, I always say it was thanks to the team. All through this period, this lasted about 6 months, we didn't lose a single critical member of our top 40 managers.
Ravi, one acute business adversity.
I somehow gone through so many business adversities that it seems that is a way of life, but it helps you to rediscover yourself. One of them I can recall is in the case of ABB, which in 2001, because of the asbestos issue and few other issues due to merger, the company had almost filed for Chapter 11 on a global basis. And, the covenant-driven banking industry, they really go out of way to make sure that you're thoroughly punished. And, I was the country head of ABB then, and though we had 1,000 crore rupees in the bank, they just froze it on the advice of the parent banks in Europe. And it really took a long while for us to really get our act in place because the entire business activity came to a screeching halt. And, the team, who really looks up to you, they simply cannot understand that we have been doing so well. And how can they freeze your bank accounts and don't let you move anything? So I think that was quite an event. And this was a global company, and the country management in a far-out country also got affected. So building the morale, getting the activity back to the normal, it was quite a task. But as Bharat said, I think this is the point when you really want your entire team to really rally behind you. At this moment, in my experience, you really have to provide a very inspirational leadership. You have to lead from the front. You have to prompt from behind. Both the things you have to do to, time to time. And thankfully, things worked out. It required, a very cool mind, and there will be a lot of criticism. There's so much pressure which you brought to bear upon it on a day-to-day basis. The top management of the company gets sucked into the routine management. So I think it's multiple challenges which really come to bear upon you, which you are not prepared for. But I somehow feel that going through adversity also brings your best out. I personally feel that you rediscover yourself. You go through a kind of pressure test of your capability and your resilience, and any loose ends that you have not even thought about, they come into focus. You got to tie them together. But providing good leadership, communication with people is extremely important at that point of time, because if you sit back in your corner room, don't speak to the people, don't share with them the things, then alienation happens and people get demotivated. So I think sometimes the adversity period doesn't last for weeks, months, it can last over years. And you just have to, step by step, get things back to normal. But the ending was happy. We could get back to the normal functioning, and finally ended up as a company a few years later with the highest PE ratio in the country. So I think it was the effort of all the people, but the leadership has a very pivotal role to play at the time that you go through any kind of adversity. Adversity sort of is not only for internal reasons, it can happen for external reasons. Very briefly, I want to tell you another one which we went through very recently. The government for our company had cancelled all the mines overnight. The company with the highest profit in the country, even in our sector, overnight, sort of came to the level of bankruptcy. And there again, we had to, get our act together. It was almost like rising from the ashes. I'm a little bit exaggerating, but it's like rising from the ashes. You have to build it again, brick by brick, carry people with you, communicate with them, and stage a recovery. And it takes not, as I said earlier, weeks or months, takes years. But it does come. You have to have trust in yourself. Your employees must have trust in you, saying you're providing good leadership, and you are basically leading by an example.
Sure. Shiv?
Yeah, so the one I can think of is the battery crisis we went through on 14th August 2007, where we issued an advisory in my ex-company Nokia to say, look, about 46 batteries in a batch size of 40 million or something had bulged, and we said, this is the advice we are giving, but you can return it and get it back. Unfortunately, in many cases, maybe not your case, Mahalakshmi, but in media, fiction becomes fact. So they said, there's a bomb in your pocket and love it, etc. And that 1 month, and specifically the first 2 weeks, were absolutely terrible because our service centers were getting rattled, and our distributors, our retailers, etc. Everybody. Okay, luckily we formed an industry, let's take Unity while we fronted it. We worked with all the operators. Sanjeev Aga is here. He helped us a lot in disseminating SMSs to people to say, look, here's a very easy process. All you need to do is this to get your battery back in case it is a BL5C battery. So we took a number of steps which involved the ecosystem, and we were extremely transparent in communication with the government, with the battery experts, and anybody we could think of who had a bearing on this issue. We went and contacted them, and they were part and parcel of all our briefings to everyone. So it worked out well. So to me, the lesson is adversity is a huge opportunity. Never waste a crisis. When we looked at this, we put that night at 2 o'clock, 14 points we needed to do. And point number 14 was, if everything fails, we need a spokesperson, to front for us. And one of the names we put on was Shahrukh there, okay? We solved all this in about 2-3 weeks. But then we had the money, so we went and signed Shahrukh. And then we had a great campaign with him, which did exceedingly well. Then IPL happened. Then we went and, sponsored his team. And thanks to the work we did in handling the battery crisis, in 2008, for the next 4 years, Nokia was voted the most trusted brand. We never did all this to say that we're going to be the most trusted brand. But the way the team handled it, I think that's what led to it. So my lesson from it is, any crisis, the first thing is never externalize it. I think we are very good at saying, you know what, this person has a stake in it, competitors are doing this, somebody else is doing this. We have a real problem at hand, blaming somebody else is not going to solve the issue. So to me, never externalize the problem. Never be a victim, never have that victim mentality, and ensure that your team doesn't have that victim mentality. It's very easy to start wallowing in self-pity, okay? I think you need to look outside. The one characteristic I would say is you need resilience, okay? Resilience, you need a lot of resilience, okay? Because those 2 weeks, I can tell you, I never wanted that to happen even to my worst enemy, ever, okay? What you go through, people say it's a lonely job. In adversity, it gets lonelier. And that's something very few people recognize. They just look at the media coverage and they think it's fine. In adversity, it gets lonelier. And to me, the big one is what Mandela said many years ago. He said, courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to overcome it. So in an adversity, I had fear, okay, when we went through the crisis. Here you have a very big brand which could tank and, you might not have the brand in 3 months' time. Now, that's a cross you need to carry. And that's a fear which, gnaws at your heart every night you go to sleep in that 1 month. So courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to overcome it, especially true in an adversity.
Very well said. Suresh, you were talking about having a clear mind, right? That's fundamental to overcoming any crisis. So, and especially during adversity, you do have a divided mind. You have a lot of self-doubt. So what is your mechanism to get past that self-doubt and bring in clarity?
Look, ultimately, I think what's important in leadership is to know and be cognizant and internalize it. And that's the fact that the buck stops with you. So ultimately, you can get all the advice in the world that you can. And there will always be those guys who will be clanging the cymbals and who will be saying, you're a great guy. Encourage the people who show the courage, but ultimately have the confidence that you will take that call and you will face the consequences for it. In this entire crisis, the one philosophy that I internalized, it is not about me. It is about the organization and the people. So when you do that, you are no longer, you insulate yourself from that ego that says, if something happens here, I, Suresh Narayan, I'm going to be dead. It's fine. You've led a good career. You had a happy life. You have a good family. You have a lot of things to thank God for. Focus on the people and get it right.
Sure. You share similar sentiment.
Absolutely. In fact, see, in all of this, I really resonate with what Shiv said. It's very easy, and you're always playing the victim. The bureaucracy is wrong, our systems are wrong, this happens in our country. You are where you are, you've fallen down and you have to get up. And if you're not going to recognize that, you are going to wallow where you are. I think the key here, in our case was, we said 3 things. First, after some time, the press will find somebody new. The bureaucrats or the bureaucracy will find somebody new. But if the consumer finds somebody new, she's not going to come back, and therefore consumer first. We just put in a very simple 3-question market research, which we did across 9 cities every week. It was simply, will I buy Cadbury chocolate? Will I feed my children Cadbury chocolate? And will I allow my children to buy Cadbury chocolate? I mean, in the heat of the crisis, it had gone from 85 to 54%. And we were clear, we'd actually set an objective as a team, in a meeting in a hall like this, saying, we will take it back to levels where it was in a year's time. And as we were tracking this, we also realized that the other 2 important things are just keep telling the truth. I think it was seminal in those days. Now a lot of people have adopted it. We were the first company that actually, there's an interesting story. We actually got Mr. Bachchan. I was at a sales meet in a small town just outside Delhi, Surajkund, and a salesman put up his hand and said, Sir, हम अब अमिताभ बच्चन को क्यों नहीं लेते हैं? I said, भाई अमिताभ बच्चन तो यार बहुत एडवर्टाइजिंग करते हैं. कहता है साहब इस देश में लोग सिर्फ 2 ही आदमियों की बात सुनते हैं, या वाजपेयी जी who was then the prime minister, या अमिताभ बच्चन. And as I was driving back to the airport, which is a long drive, I thought there was a lot of merit in what he's saying. And since it was difficult to get Vajpayee ji, we said let's go with the second alternative. And when we went to Mr. Bachchan and, for the first time, I remember going to his house late at night and telling him, Mr. Bachchan, for the first time, we want you to be a brand ambassador. And a true brand ambassador believes in the brand, so we want to actually take you to the factory. When you're convinced, then we want you to be the brand ambassador. And, as they say, good ideas all foster. The idea to shoot the first ad in the factory was his idea. He said, I wish, after he saw a factory, he was thoroughly impressed. Like at Nestle, in any good food company, quality is completely non-negotiable. I mean, nobody touches the chocolate, so there's no question. But having said this, when we realized that the consumer still has an element of doubt, we actually introduced a double packaging. Now, which was unprecedented. Cadbury did this nowhere. Logically, if you asked me, we were selling then 1 million bars a day. A total of 9 bars in the country were reported with problems. But it had become such a big issue that if we didn't show the consumer some tangible action, we were not going to get back the consumer. And we actually got this double packaging done, where basically we said, listen, we're now double packing it so it's bulletproof, nothing can go in. And the great thing was, it wasn't 12 months, 6 months later, actually, we got back our scores. And again, as I said, that's the benefits of having a great team.
Right. What Suresh and Bharat are talking about are one-time problems. Of course, it could have taken down a company and made a major dent. But what you talked about is like the kind of adversity that can take years to, there is no uncertainty about it, that it could take 4, 5, 6, 7 years till the time you rejig your business model, get past, become cost competitive, whatever, right? So what do you tell yourself and what do you tell your team? Because not everybody in your team will really be able to see light at the end of the tunnel.
But this is quite true, that no matter how much effort you make, that you can't get everybody to buy in for your plans for restoring the health of the company. So you have to be prepared for the eventuality, no matter how much your communication that you do. There will always be some people who will drop out, etc. But if you can retain the bulk of the people and get them to share your vision and the company's salvation plan, so I think you've done a great job there. I must tell you, my sense is a company gets into an adversarial situation, there's an implicit admission that somewhere it was not very observant and somewhere they have grown weak. That's why, they become vulnerable and they got into adversarial. I mean, I can give you examples of companies that everybody knows about. Even a company like Apple, if you recall in late 80s, they had suddenly lost, their leading edge and they had gone into hibernation. Until this stage, they come back. Same thing happened to IBM. IBM also, once again, was on its way down. The share was not performing well. It was not seen to be any sort of the big blue chip company anymore. But from within, they sort of did the introspection. They found out what are the areas they need to really beef up or put more forces on. And therefore, discovery has to be from within. We have to contrive mechanisms whereby you build your internal strength. And in this effort, you do your internal resources, and you should have no hang-ups, and also engage competencies from outside to see that your act of recovery is there. It is true what you're saying, that in consumer product companies like Nestle, Cadbury's, and Pepsi, the problem which come, sometimes problem perception are short-lasting. But if you take large engineering companies or metallurgical, electrical companies, the problems, they take much longer to resolve because there are many ramifications of the problem. So therefore, you really need to introspect and find out what is it you can do differently. How is it, for example, innovation. Many companies lose out in our class of business. Innovation engine is very important. If you're not constantly innovating, you're an automatic loser, and you get yourself into a situation of an adversarial situation because you're becoming irrelevant. So I think we really have to see how we can bring in more constant innovation within the company so that our business concepts remain relevant. Then external management. For example, in Europe, I mean, I can confess it here, ABB got into this issue of asbestos because they thought that using asbestos is good enough with all the boilers. Suddenly, Americans said that people are getting, lungs affected by asbestos. And the billions and billions of dollars of claims came, and we were not prepared for that. We didn't provide any contingency about it. And nobody at our end thought that we should look at the materials that we use. So we shouldn't have used asbestos, as the time went by. So we are ourselves to blame. So, later on, of course, the innovation and action, engine went into action. We came a new generation of materials. It took time. So you're quite right in saying that in an industry like ours, the period of recovery can be long, and it true is, but you have to make sure you are persevering and keep communicating with the team. That's very important. Many times what happens, the problem remains in the mind of 9 wise men on the top, and the rest of them are only speculating in the corridors what's going on. I think that is the kind of situation we must avoid at any cost.
So one of the things I hear people saying is that in times of adversity, especially economic climate turns bad, or, don't stop investing for the future. Don't avoid, for example, Mr. Goenka said, don't, Mahindra, for example, continue to invest in their research and development even during adverse conditions. So that's a real problem, because you have to survive the today to invest for the future. So when you are in situations where you are resource constrained, how do you think and prioritize?
Yeah, so that's always a big challenge, because every time you slow down, like the last 3 months have been a slowdown for most industries. Okay, and that's a fact. But invariably, consumers tend to reward brands which consistently remind them of why they exist. And second, brands which innovate in that time. Okay, there's enough evidence to show that both these factors play a positive role in resurgence when the trough is over. So the big challenge is, obviously, when you have a crisis, the first thing is, look, I need to protect my bottom line, let's do all the cutting, etc. And the first cut, which always everybody talks about, the whole world, is let's cut advertising. It's the most dangerous thing to do. It's the most dangerous thing to do, because it's like saying you're flying on a 747 from here to London, and the pilot tells you, ladies and gentlemen, I can still fly with 2 engines off. Will you accept it? I think that's what happens to brands when you shut off 2 engines. And many people don't realize that. That's the first line item which goes, because most CFOs think that's very easy, or that's the logic. Then the second is to say, okay, I will now focus on the big innovations and launch them. Okay, people will still say, let the market get better, give yourself a chance with a better innovation during a better market time. But I think no better time than in a challenging time. Pick your best innovation and go after it. And the third one is, you must have a very clear narrative to your team. Okay, invariably when there's a crisis out there, slowdown of market, etc., everybody is struggling to explain why their numbers are not happening. Okay, you need a lot of empathy to understand why those numbers are not happening, number one. Second is, when they're searching for answers, they want light at the end of the tunnel. They want leadership to say, hey guys, it's 3 months, 4 months, this is the macro picture, I think it'll turn around, just stay the course. Okay, the more pressure you put on people when the economic downturn happens, then you become a pressure cooker type of a company. And then people start leaving you, because they say, hey, this management doesn't understand. Those are the real dangers when you have a slowdown. What to cut, what to innovate, what to put in, and how do you take care of the emotional fragility of people when they're seeing that things around them are not working?
So just one last question for everybody. I mean, business adversity is one thing, but we all are real human beings, and we all go through personal adversities too. So can you recall one instance, if at all, of a very extremely adverse, essentially a personal adversity? And what did you tell yourself? How did you get past it?
Look, I think in my own life, probably the lowest point I've had when my mother passed away. So that was probably the one that in a sense unhinged me the most. But then I'm also a great believer in the Bhagavad Gita. I know that all of us have to pass through life, and there are ups and downs, and what is yours today is someone else's tomorrow. So I try and practice the same in my own corporate life, because we are part of this journey, and on all these big designations don't matter. It's what deeds you do and what you leave behind that matters. So I think in all this, I've internalized one philosophy saying that as a human being, you're a recipient of both pleasure and pain. It's pleasure and pain. So if there is pain, learn to cope with it, and this too shall pass.
Easier said than done, though.
Yeah. While obviously there is personal adversity of near ones passing away, etc., I'll pick up an example which is personal adversity in a career sense. You know, it's fascinating. I've been on both sides when we've acquired companies and when we got acquired. The fascinating thing is when you're senior, you're part of a leadership team of a company and suddenly you're acquired. Actually, you go back to zero. It's like Monopoly where they say, you know, go back to start all over again, build your... And you're saying, listen, I've built 13 years of equity. All of that goes, and I mean, frankly, coping with an acquisition. Everybody keeps telling companies how to succeed in acquisitions. Not many people tell acquirees or acquirers how to succeed in when you're acquired. And it is a traumatic, I mean, you know, a large part of the leadership team actually left simply because you don't know how to handle this situation where, you know, you were Sachin Tendulkar one day and the guy says, now start from the village and, you know, work your way back up again. So it is, and my lesson in all of this is, frankly, just don't take yourself too seriously.
That's easy. What do you think?
Well, I personally feel that as you grow, you know, you get more emotional stability, and you know, you don't go through upheavals, being too happy or too depressed kind of thing. This is something I've taught myself over the years. It has come, and I think that I can't think of anyone who doesn't go through personal adversity for any reason, professional or health of someone very near and dear to you or someone passing away prematurely. I think we all go through that. You just have to tell yourself that, you know, I've always said that going forward, I'm a kind of Karam Yogi, and looking back, I try to be fatalist. Because that's how it had to be happened. Nothing could have changed the course of it. And I think that's the only thing I keep telling myself, and try to come to terms with the situation and make the best of it. It's good to stay positive, you know, because sometimes, you know, there's precious little that you can do. I mean, I had a relative who was very, very seriously sick, and nobody knew whether she's going to live or not. It happened to me at a time when I was very young. And, you know, at one time, if I had just, you know, acted weak, my feet were shaking because the stakes were simply so high. But, you know, I taught myself that I have to be stable. I have to navigate out of that situation of crisis. And, you know, and when the mind was peaceful, I could also think of better options how to move forward. I think the emotional stability is something that we all must make an effort to achieve. That's what has guided me.
Shiv, any instance of
Yeah,
personal adversity?
When we think of adversity, we think of health, we think of financial, etc. In careers, and it's happened with me many times, so I have no, hassle in accepting it. The biggest adversity when you work through your career is intellectual adversity. So I'll give an example. In levers, the category I handled, the board and the boss wanted to follow a certain direction. Intrinsically, me and the team felt it was not right. We said this is exactly the wrong way to grow this category where we are market leaders. Okay, we didn't agree with that strategy at all. But at the end of the day, if the board and the boss have decided, you go along like a loyal soldier, which is what we did. And then it didn't work, sure enough. At the end of 3 months, the board and the boss called me back and said, okay, we accept it's not working. Now try your strategy. We did that. It succeeded. We had that quarter 43% unit volume growth. But at that point of time, I deeply thought to myself and said, is this my company? Every day I've come here to work 24/7, thinking this is my company. For the first time, I felt it wasn't. And that's when I decided to leave. That intellectual adversity and that clash, nothing prepares you for it. Because you think you're doing the right thing, but a lot of people think they're doing the better thing. Okay, and that's always a challenge. And you can never, ever have an answer for it. Okay, the answer is negotiation. You can negotiate till you succeed, or you can negotiate your way out of the company. But that intellectual adversity is a real difficult one to handle. And that's one of the reasons why, people leave companies.
Any questions? Anybody, any questions?
To begin with, I'd like to thank all the panel members. I've thoroughly enjoyed this session. I think there has been a lot of authentic sharing and a lot of value addition. And Mahalakshmi, you asked some very penetrating questions. So thank you very much. I just want to make one quick comment on this adversity factor. And I think it's been said by different people in different ways. You know, when an adversity strikes, then there are two problems that we have as human beings. The first problem is we are upset. The second problem is the problem itself. So the important thing is to manage these two problems in that sequence. The first thing is to manage your upset, emotional stability, as Ravi said, and then with a clear mind, go back to looking at the problem and finding the solution. That, to my mind, is my mantra and is the mantra which everybody else has also shared. But as I said, this was a very, very enlightening and a very, very enjoyable, though the topic was tough, but we enjoyed the panel discussion. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Shashi Sinha from Lakshmi Media Group. And it was a very, very nice panel discussion. Though the issues that you discussed, in most of the cases, the adversities were induced by external factors. And professional CEOs rose to the situation and they turned around. They got their companies out of the crisis, Nestle including. But my question is, when some problems are systemically induced, they are induced by internal systemic errors, like Volkswagen, and the incumbent CEO is out of the scene, and you bring in a professional CEO to turn around the company and bring it out of adversity. What will be the drivers, what will be the motivations to this professional CEO to take the company out of the morass? Anyone of you can answer this. Thank you.
Look, I think it's a great question, but if I were to look at it, organizations survive and thrive only and only because of purpose and values. If organizations did not have purpose and values, factories and people and money is not going to make them survive. In the case that you talk about, if there is a clear dissonance in the purpose and the values of the organization, only, not even God, I would submit, can save it. And that's why it is so important for CEOs to be evangelists more than being operating managers. I mean, most of my job goes in primarily re-emphasizing the purpose and values to people in my organization, and to take every small instance of a deviance as a sign that we need to act with clarity and with communication. So, my only response would be that where purpose and values are at dissonance with what you should be doing as a company, no professional CEO can come and change it. I mean, it's like changing the DNA structure. A crook is a crook. He cannot be made into a saint by somebody coming and preaching to him 200 times. So it's a bit like that in organizations as well.
I think the case that you're mentioning is obviously a case where there's a collateral failure of the CEO as well as the board. You know, the short-term objectives and goals seem to have got the better of the company. These are this is a very unfortunate accident, I would say, because no company is supposed to compromise on their core values. And so therefore, you know, these are exceptions. They're not a matter of rule. A company has to have, its more, ethical values, sort of reign supreme all the time. They should never compromise. So it's more a case of failure than a kind of common problem with the frequent occurrence.
See, if I may just add, there is this old adage that, honesty is only tested on an empty stomach. I mean, organizations, it's always good to talk about values. It's when your back is to the wall as to what, how you practice those values. And frankly, that's what distinguishes great organizations from very average ones.
Hello.
One last question.
I'm here. First of all, I really enjoyed the session and all the questions in it. I'm over here if you cannot see me. I work for Meltwater. We have been pioneers in, of course, crisis alerts and all these kind of things in the past. I wanted to ask one question. You all said that you bear the brunt and had nightmares when crisis happened to you guys. I wanted to ask you, what was your access to information at that particular juncture, and have you improved or have you changed the way you're getting information today at an executive level at this juncture so that you can actually get the information quicker and maybe curb the damage which you've actually faced earlier?
See, you know, when these things hit you, you realize how naive and how simplistic you are. And therefore, I mean, you know, just as Shiv was saying, I remember I used to keep the last 2 pages of my notebook with points that things we will do differently once, you know, this goes away. And frankly, those 2 pages actually became 4 or 5. I think we did improve a lot more on the information, you know, for a simple thing. I mean, those days in Cadbury, we didn't even have a corporate affairs person. So marketing was supposed to handle corporate affairs. Now, we did improve a lot, but I can tell you, the same thing happened in the UK, and the UK was Cadbury's flagship. About 2 years later, they had this massive salmonella scare. And they had all gone through crisis training and so on and so forth. And believe me, they struggled actually a little more than we did, because they had the disadvantage of having the headquarters very close to them.
Well, I would just like to second what Bharat said. I think, you know, one of the things that probably we have strengthened in the whole system is we were accused of being, and sometimes not unfounded, of being a very reticent company. You know, Nestle has been off the radar, or the media radar, for a long, long time. So I think as a result of the crisis, which incidentally, as Shiv rightly said, is a huge opportunity for the company, I think we have kind of spread our tentacles in terms of sensing much better than what we have been. I think organizations evolve, and as Bharat said, sometimes you are caught flat-footed not because you don't have ideas or you don't have conviction, but you simply don't get the ground sense coming to you. And I believe that every crisis teaches you that ability to get a bit more nimble. What is even more important is to keep that organization in a crisis mode forever. That is the huge challenge of leadership. You know, getting out of a crisis, nice stories, well done, great show, boys, move on. And then you're back to the same game again. So the challenge of leadership is to ensure that you're perpetually like a frog that has been thrown into boiling water, that you try and extricate yourself and don't allow yourself to get boiled over.
I just want to tell you that sometimes adversity is not a one-zero thing which will happen with a blink of an eye. Adversity sometimes builds up. And if the management doesn't get to know the adversarial trends setting in at a good time, then obviously it comes to a very explosive proportion, by which time everybody gets to know about it. Many times, you know, the company boards and the CEOs, they try to ring fence the whole issue, isolate the rest of the organization. They think they can make a good job of it, resolving the issue, but it doesn't help, because if you involve more stakeholders in the issue, you can do a better job. I mean, this is something I can recall from the ABB experience that we had, where the asbestos issue did not get built up just a matter of a week or a fortnight. It was something which was building up for several months and years, and the management tried to sort of insulate this information from the rest of the organization, and came to know when it assumed explosive proportions.
I'd say in many cases, there are symptoms and signals well before something comes up and blows up, and they are there. And the only way CEOs can really help here is to encourage people to talk and speak up at the first instance rather than wait for it. Second, travel a lot. Okay, this morning I had a meeting with our plant team here. We ended by saying, okay, what are the things which bug you guys? What are the things which worry you guys? There are 4 or 5 things. They're still internal, they're not external. So manageable. But the more you talk, I think the more you'll be able to sense. Because this thing is not isolated. The problems in a company are not isolated to one unit. If there's a problem, it will be there across, and you need to, take it out. And one thing I always liked, a quote from Ronald Reagan. He said, trust but verify. And I think that's a very important advice for all leaders. Trust but verify. It doesn't mean, you're shutting your people, but it is your job to be absolutely certain about every single fact that is coming up to you.
Thank you so much. I really loved this discussion. I hope everybody loved it too. Thanks.
Thank you.